Let's start off today's event with looking at a couple of brands. And I want you to think about, what do you associate them with? First up, Ben and Jerry's, delicious ice cream, very expensive, but they're also known for their corporate activism. Old Spice has evolved over the years from something that your dad probably used to now being recognized with their wacky, sometimes funny, zany commercials. I bet that if you go to a warm destination and your toes are in the sand and you want to have an adult beverage, I bet one of the first products that comes into your mind is a Corona. All three of these, with Ben and Jerry's, Old Spice, and Corona, are very powerful brands. That's more than just a logo and a name. And that's what we want to talk about today, is your brand RX, creating that prescription for your practice brand of what you want to be known for from your existing clients and your potential clients from when they first get introduced to you. So a little bit about me, your speaker today, before we get kicked off and really into the meat of today's topic. I've been in the industry for a little bit more than 10 years, 2 decades in marketing overall. In 2018, I launched LPL Financial's Marketing Solutions product, which I will talk about a rebrand that we did into the later parts of 2019. And over my career at MetLife, Mass Mutual, LPL Financial, and then since joining Independent Advisor Alliance in 2023, I've helped hundreds of practices and advisors with creating their brand from scratch. So if they came to an independent channel as from a wirehouse and they did not have that existing brand, so creating things, or some examples I'll talk through later of some existing brands and they needed either a refresh or an entire rebrand. Those two words that I just said, or two phrases that I just said right there, of a brand refresh and a rebrand, that's part of what we're going to talk about today. So let's talk about what success looks like. At the end of this event, you should be checking off all of these boxes. You're going to understand what a brand is, rebrand, and a brand refresh. You're going to understand when you should do it and why you should do it. And then what's next? What are those actionable next steps for me to either do a rebrand or a brand refresh or nothing at all? And ultimately decide, is this the right time for you to take action? If we check all of these boxes, we've had great success. So let's get into some branding 101 of the definition and importance of both of these. Your brand refresh is updating your logo, your color palette, your website, your fonts. Let's use an analogy of your home. You have your living room and you decide this is out of style, or for whatever reason, maybe there's a rip in the couch or whatever, something that you need to take action on. You're not completely moving, you're not demolishing it. Instead, you're maybe putting a fresh coat of paint onto the walls or some new artwork. That's a little bit more of a refresh. So think of that same way with your own brand. Versus a rebrand is a radical transformation, redoing what the strategy, positioning, messaging, identity, everything is changing. So which one is right for you? Let's talk about some of those reasons that would cause for you to do a refresh or a rebrand. So over on the left, that refreshing drink right there is your refresh. That's if you just want to update your current logo and visuals. So maybe that's that you've gone stale or you're evolving or you're launching a new product or service or a new market, or you've gotten market feedback. And you want to have consistency across all of those different touch points. What I mean by touch points is not only your logo and where it appears. Maybe it's on a shirt, on a coffee mug, your website, your social media, print brochures, whatever, that you want to have consistency, that once you're updating in one place, you're updating in many places. The more extensive part of branding is your entire rebrand over on the right side. So you want to create an entirely new persona. But watch out is that it is expensive. both in time and actual dollars. Maybe you've expanded into that new target market or geographic market, some kind of M&A, you've acquired a new practice, or you're merging with another one, or legal reasons. What I mean by that is that sometimes practices in financial services don't go through all the steps of trademarking, and you can have a lot, there's only so many trees that you can name your practice after, and then whatever suffix at the end of financial advisors, capital, wealth management, financial, whatever it is, that there's going to be some overlap. And sometimes a practice will go live without either trademarking or doing that research, and then you'll get that little knock on that door of some kind of legal action, maybe a cease and desist to take control of their brand and make sure that you're not using it. Or one that came up that I've worked with in the past of a practice not associated with this advisor, a completely different brand, but their names are kind of similar and they're in a a similar area geographically. And that other firm got into some legal action that made it into the news. This was that tipping point, that little push to go forward for this advisor in their practice of doing an entire rebrand. So let's get into some steps here for an entire rebrand of that path. To execute a successful refresh, I want you to consider these. First, establish those clear goals. What are you trying to do? Why are you doing it? So identifying those reasons. So if you back up mentally to that slide that we just looked at of some of those reasons that you would either do a refresh or a rebrand, knowing that you're doing it for the right reasons, not just to do it. That can be more on your refresh, but on that rebrand, what are you trying to do and why are you trying to do it? It could be those legal reasons, it could be that new market, whatever. Identify those, because if you know your why, you're going to stay on track. Next, create a detailed plan. So think through all of those different things of where are our assets? How quickly do I want to do this? There's a lot of different reputable organizations out there that can assist with a rebrand, just like IA's Creative Capital team. That can help out with all of this to understand what is an appropriate amount of time to do something. There is no one size fits all. If somebody came to me and asked, hey, how long will it take to do a rebrand? It really depends on how many assets are out there. Going back to that living room example, we were using that for a refresh, but say we were doing it in complete demolition, which is kind of like a rebrand that you're tearing it down and starting almost over, is how long will it take to get the materials, to get everything done? And part of that detailed plan is that order of operations. So what needs to get done in what kind of order? Next, announce those changes internally. If you're not a solo practice, you have anybody from ops, admin, marketing, client services, other advisors. If you're that decision maker, you need to share that internally. You want to have that preface of, please keep this internal. This is not for public knowledge yet, but we're going to be going through a rebrand. And during that communication, I've led a lot of change management in my career. And there's two questions that always pop up first. There will be many questions after that, but the first two, why is this happening and what does it mean for me? So your why, going back to identifying those reasons, you need to share why we are doing that. There's a trademark, we're getting into this new market, we're expanding geographically, we want to change our product. Whatever that is, you need to share that out. And then what does it mean for me? What kind of role am I going to play into this? So if you have that detailed plan and you have some kind of outline, it's going to go over well. Next, they're going to ask a whole bunch of other questions like, what's the timing? What's the name going to be? All of that. Next up, update those brand guidelines. You should have at minimum a one-page document that lays out your brand guidelines. If you're not familiar with that is, you can check out some of the resources that we have on Connects, or just Google one-page brand guideline, and you'll probably come up with a couple of different samples there. That you should have your color palette, you should have your fonts, your logo, any kind of second or third versions of logos. And what I mean by that is, say your logo is blue on a white background. Well, what if I wanted it on this shirt? Now I'm going to put a white one, or one that is more of like an icon that can show up at the top of your internet browser or on your social media channels. So updating all of those brand guidelines. At minimum, it should be one page. It could be a simplified version. I like to get even more detailed into it. I've seen ones that are 75 pages. I don't think it needs to be something like that, but what kind of imagery do we want to use? Are you going to stick with stock photos or artwork or cartoons, whatever it is? And what kind of writing tone are we going to have? And what I mean by that is, do you want it to be witty and sarcastic and funny? Think back to Old Spice. Or do you want it to be more corporate, more business tone, professional? No emojis or exclamation points or superlatives. So understanding what those brand guidelines are and documenting them. Next up, you're going to update your visual elements. So the difference between this and the brand guidelines is your guidelines, you're setting all of your rules. This is how we're going to operate as a brand. Now I actually need to get to work. So updating all those visual elements, and that's where that detailed plan comes in. You have a PowerPoint. Like if IAA went through a rebrand, this wonderful template that you're seeing, I need to change out the logo, maybe the color, maybe the name, need to change all of those things. So where are all of your assets? And then you need to get to work. Next up, implementing those changes gradually. This doesn't need to be we shut down at Friday at 4 o'clock and at 9 a.m. on Monday, we're live with this new brand. You can kind of do it gradually, and you can do some really cool things where you can turn a negative into, hey, this is taking a long time, there's a lot of things to go through, versus like a slow release, like a tease. Like here, you can build up a little bit of anticipation for what that rebrand will ultimately be. Last, you're going to monitor and evaluate. So going back to those establishing your clear goals, if you're using that methodology of SMART goals, so specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely, then you should be able to clearly monitor and evaluate. Sometimes, though, you're going to have objective goals, like, are we happy with this? There's not really a way to measure that unless you, I don't know, scale 1 to 10. How much do you like our new logo? And we want it to be a 9.3 or above. So it can be some subjective goals as well with your objective goals. So, for example, I want to increase website traffic or get new social media followers or build my email list or get new clients. How can you relate it back to all of that work? So this is your roadmap, your path to a rebrand. Let's shift over to the other side, to our brand refresh. So the path is going to be somewhat similar there. So I want to share some missteps that I have seen during the path of a brand refresh. So I'm not going to go through each one of these in great detail, but on this brand refresh, which if you remember, it's more of a makeover. You're not completely redesigning anything. Going back to that initial slide that I had with the 2 Starbucks logos, that was a little bit of a refresh to look a little bit more modern. So a couple things that I want to highlight here. One, skipping your research. So with a refresh, you don't want to seem like you're repetitive of another brand. Maybe you want to see what other kind of firms are out there geographically that are, and going to the same target market if you're limited to one geographic, but to that ideal client, are there others that are in that space? And maybe you want to be a little bit different. Coca-Cola is red, Pepsi is blue. Um, Next up, doing it yourself. So taking on this entire burden by yourself, I strongly encourage, just like any other part of being an independent financial advisor, you're a small business owner, you might be a solo person working alone, or you might have 10 people in your office. If there is the skill set and capacity and resources to do it internally, that's great. If not, outsource it. I'm a big fan of outsourcing. So if you can leave it to a professional, even though you're going to look at that cost of hiring an organization, either outside or IA's creative capital team, just think about that time investment, what your hourly rate is, and say, is it worth this amount of money? And also, can they do it better than I do? Also, focusing only on your visuals. Big misstep. A lot of times when you think of a brand, you think of a logo. But think of those three images that I showed at the front, those first three slides about those companies, of what do you associate with them? You're not thinking of the Corona logo when you hear Corona. You're probably thinking of your toes in the sand, you're in a nice beach chair, the breeze is in your air, it is in your hair, and you're just having a relaxing, good time. You're not thinking about what that logo is. Um, the last one is your brand equity. So don't throw away all of that history that you've got. That Starbucks example, they didn't completely change it, they just modernized their logo. So don't throw away that brand equity. You've spent time building your practice. You've got several households, hundreds of accounts. Don't let all of that history go away to be short-sighted to update things. So maybe it's a little bit of a homage to your new or to your old brand with your new. So before we wrap up and get into which is right for you, I teased at the beginning of a rebrand that I was part of at LPL Financial. So back in 2018, I joined LPL to start the I'll say a marketing agency that advisors could outsource all of their digital marketing activities to. It was initially part of an entire virtual suite of offerings. There was an admin solution, a CFO solution, a technology solution, and I led the marketing. And when we first launched in March of 2018, we were called Virtual Chief Marketing Officer, VCMO. It kind of flowed nicely, even though we live in a world full of acronyms, especially at LPL. We really liked VCMO. There was a nice flow to it, and we thought that it was a good representation. But as we were getting out of our product launch, out of that pilot and going to market, we realized a couple of things. One, and keep in mind, this is pre-COVID of living in a virtual webcam, I can work from anywhere area. The word virtual was throwing people off, that they said, is this an actual person? Which was a huge selling point for us, of not an automated system. You weren't hiring this agency and you can write into a help desk and somebody will get back to you. No, you had a dedicated marketing person working with you. So that virtual was making it seem like, is this a automated? Is this AI? Is this a robot? Who am I actually working with? The second thing is, it was virtual chief marketing officer. When you think of what a chief marketing officer does, it was not the activities that we were doing. This was more of a marketing consultant role. They were not designing a robust strategy. It was more of taking what your goals and objectives were and where you wanted to be in 1, 3, 5 years, whatever, and taking that into action. They were not truly living like a chief marketing officer. So what we were called and what we were doing did not align. So we rebranded, and then we had to keep in mind it was not just VCMO that we were talking about. It was this entire suite of virtual offerings. So all of them became business solutions, and then you had admin solutions, CFO solutions, marketing solutions, etc. So that was why we went through that entire rebrand. This was not a brand refresh. We needed to change everything that we had done. It was a little bit of a challenge because we had started to get out there. So now we were having to redo things that we'd already gotten out to market, but we didn't have a ton of brand equity. I'm talking like 18 months. So to have, a couple dozen conversations and make sure that our existing subscribers knew. And so when you say, hey, you're part of marketing solutions, that they're like, what happened to VCMO? I can tell you though, 3 years later, I was still getting messages from existing subscribers saying, hey, I'm part of your VCMO product, blah, blah, blah. So probably didn't do the best job at launching that and that repetition to let people know what that new name was. So before we wrap up, our last thing, if you remember what our great success was of making sure that we knew the differences between a brand refresh and a rebrand, why you do it, how to do it, things to consider. Now let's get into that decision time. So should you do a brand refresh, a complete rebrand, or absolutely nothing at all? So some questions to ask yourselves are, do I look outdated? Take a look at your website. Take a look at your logo. Take a look at any of the collateral. If it's your golf polo shirt, on your travel coffee mug, on your stationery, whatever. Does this look outdated? Is this that chair that your grandma had that's been in the family that just kind of looked out of place? So is it time for that update? Is there a reason to do it related to your market? For example, there was an advisor that I worked with that said that as they bought a new practice, their target market, like kind of what their niche was, it did not, it wasn't correlating between the two, of the old and the new. So having that new target market was a little bit of a press to go through those steps. Are you thinking too broad? What I mean by that is I talk to advisors all the time, and this is more in a previous company, non-independent, of, hey, tell me who your target market is. I'm working with people that are preparing for retirement. Great, that's everybody. That's not really a target market. The more specific you are, the more, even though you're going to shrink who that target audience is, it's going to resonate with them more. An example of that is, I'm outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. I love going to our beaches in the Carolinas. And one of the stops that I see, or on my path on the highway there, I see a billboard for the biker lawyer. It is just what you would think of a gentleman with a briefcase, a suit, sitting on a Harley or some motorcycle. And if you were a biker and you bought domains, he had a very easy vanity number for you to be able to call. He knew who he was trying to reach. I have no idea about his practice. Maybe he works with everybody, but he said, for this target market, I'm going to advertise here, versus maybe he has one for doctors. I don't know. But are you being too broad? Are you trying to be everything to everyone? It's not going to work. Do you already have an established brand? I've existed for 25 years, or it was my father's practice, and now I have taken it over. Maybe that's where you're just going to do a refresh and not do an entire rebrand, because you don't want to throw away that brand equity. Is this a good time? Do you have the money to invest? Do you have the resources to be able to do this? The time part, I weigh a little bit less, just because this is something, if you're an independent financial advisor, you're not thinking about all the time. And when you have your to-do list, and there's 10 items, it's going to be number 10. And when one of those items gets checked off, something else is probably going to jump over it. So commit to it. If you're able to have the resources to do it, commit to that time frame and get it done. Is there any kind of new competition? So it could be either in your existing market or out there in the industry that maybe they're targeting a specific market that you're trying to reach. If it's, hey, I want to get into the millennial crowd, now that we're having the wealth transfer, they're becoming, higher earners, and they're getting more wealth and need more direction, maybe there's a space there that is causing you to consider this. Last, do you believe brand refresh, rebrand will make an impact on your practice? Don't do it just to do it. There should be some kind of purpose. So think back to all of those questions of, does it not align with what we want to get across to our target market? Are there legal issues? Is there expansion, either a merger or acquisition, that's causing it? So truly think, will this make an impact on your practice? I want to thank you for watching this about your brand RX, your brand prescription. My name is David Buzo, Chief Marketing Officer at Independent Advisor Alliance. And don't forget that being independent doesn't mean that you're doing this alone. Thank you.